Touches, touchdown, and trust. That's what we're looking for in this week's running back rankings. And some backs are taking over, others are losing ground. So let's see who's earning the workload in week 6. What's up, Headliner Nation? My name is Brad, the Rankings King. And before we dive into this week's rankings, just a reminder that these are the consensus rankings between Jake and Kyle. And for more detailed analysis, check out the start-sit videos from Kyle already posted on the channel this week. And if you want even more breakdowns each week, make sure to join the Fantasy Headliners community by hitting that join button below. That's going to get you access to extra rankings like flex, kicker, defense, and a spot inside of our Discord. Now, before we get to the week 6 rankings, let's get into a few of the hits and misses from week number 5. Our first hit is Breece Hall, and after the injury to Braylon Allen, we expected a lot more Breece in a good Dallas matchup. We had him in the top 12, and he finished top 12. Our next hit was Jordan Mason, and the matchup against Cleveland and so many offensive line injuries made us drop him in the rankings. We had him at running back 21, and he finished at running back 22. Next up is Chase Brown, and he's such a good player in a bad situation. He's hard to sit, and he's hard to start. We put him at running back 27, and he finished at running back 27. All right, that's it for our hits. Let's look at our misses, and our first miss was Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. And with the split that they have there in Washington, it's been so hard to trust him. He finally got a bulk of the touches, and he looked great, and so we had him way too low in week 5. Next miss was Michael Carter, and coming into the week, there was no clarity of whether it was going to be Carter or DeMercado. And had DeMercado not dropped the ball before the goal line, they both would have been fine. That gave Carter more touches, and we had him too low in week 5. And then our last miss is Ramondre Stevenson, and fumbles don't matter anymore. Stevenson's going to be the guy in this backfield. They're just not committed to Henderson. We didn't have Stevenson high enough in week 5. All right, that's it for the hits and misses. Let's get into tier 1 for week number 6. We've got Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, Josh Jacobs, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kyren Williams, Saquon Barkley, and Devon Achane. At the top of the list, number 1, we've got Jonathan Taylor, and over 600 yards and 7 touchdowns through just 5 weeks. That puts him on pace to break his personal single season record of 2,171 yards. Add in the fact that Arizona allows over 20 fantasy points per game to running backs, and JT claims the number 1 spot this week. And number 2, we've got Christian McCaffrey, and CMC just had 30 touches for the second time in 2025. His usage has been through the roof with all of these injuries on the 49ers offense. He has just under 700 yards through 5 weeks, and Tampa allows 18.8 fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 3, we've got Bijan Robinson coming off of his bye, and he's also had at least 110 total yards in all 4 of his games this year. He has actually gone over 100 yards receiving twice already this year, and he'll have to be included in the pass game again this week against Buffalo. At number 4, we've got Josh Jacobs also coming off his bye, and he gets a great matchup against Cincy. There is no team in the NFL that allows more fantasy points per game to running backs than the Bengals. So it's perfect timing for Jacobs, who's coming off of his best game of the year in week 4. At number 5, we've got Jahmyr Gibbs, and he's the current running back 5 on the season, and he's had at least 10 fantasy points in all 5 of those games. But the ceiling has been a little bit lower due to the passing work. He only has 4 receptions over the last 2 games, and Kansas City has been shutting down run games as of late, and so we've got him at number 5. At number 6, we've got Kyren Williams, and he's now scored 13 plus fantasy points in 3 of 5 games. Now he's riding a hot streak into a game against one of the worst defenses in the NFL, the Ravens. They've allowed over 28 fantasy points per game to running backs, and Kyren just played in 91% of the snaps. Can you say bell cow status? At number 7, we've got Saquon Barkley, and Saquon just had 9 touches in a 1-score game. Luckily, they resulted in 88 total yards and a touchdown, and it saved his fantasy day. Now he has a sore knee, short week, and a matchup against his old team who allow the 7th most fantasy points per game to running backs. And at number 8, we've got Devon Achane. And man, did he struggle against that Carolina run defense in week 5. 10 carries for 16. That's enough to make you gag unless you're a Panthers fan. And fortunately, he keeps scoring touchdowns because he's going to need one this week against the Chargers, who allow the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. All right, so there's tier number 1 for you. And before we head into the next tier, I want to make sure that you're all set up on Underdog. You already know we are crushing those player pick'ems on Underdog this year. So what are you waiting for? Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app. Create a new account using the referral code HEADLINERS when you do so. Then just make your initial deposit and come join a contest. If you sign up with that promo code, again, it's HEADLINERS, you're going to get access to all of the promos that Underdog offers weekly. And check this out. Once you play your first $5, they're going to give you a hundo in bonus funds. So play 5, get 100. It's that easy. And don't forget, Jake is going to be breaking down the best picks weekly in a show on Fridays to lock in your picks. So links to join are in the description, and we look forward to playing with you this week. All right, let's look at tier number 2. We've got James Cook, Ashton Jeanty, Javonte Williams, Breece Hall, Quinshon Judkins, J.K. Dobbins, and Rico Dowdle. And number 9, we've got James Cook, and I guess he's allowed a bad game every once in a while, but it wasn't the best time for it in week 5. Now he has a matchup against Atlanta, who allows the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs of any team in the NFL. That and Buffalo refuses to throw the ball to him. And number 10, we've got Ashton Jeanty. And after the slow start, he now has back-to-back games with over 100 total yards. He just saw a career high in 7 targets and now has 19-plus touches in back-to-back games. Now he gets Tennessee, who allows the 3rd most fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 11, we've got Javonte Williams. And let's be honest, dude is really a fringe tier 1 running back at this point. He's had at least 90 total yards or at least 1 touchdown in all 5 games this year. And with the Miles Sanders injury, we're going to see a lot of Javonte Williams. It's just going to depend on which Carolina defense shows up this week. All right, at number 12, we've got Breece Hall. And Breece has taken advantage of some good matchups as of late. He's had over 100 total yards in back-to-back games against Miami and Dallas. No Braylon Allen leads to more touches, though, and he's going to need it against a tougher Denver defense. At number 13, we've got Quinshon Judkins, and this rookie continues to roll. He's now scored at least 13 fantasy points in 3 straight games, and he's had 49 touches over the last 2 weeks. Huge usage, great efficiency, and let's be honest, this Steelers defense hasn't been great. They allow the 11th most fantasy points per game at the running back position. Number 14, we've got J.K. Dobbins, and there hasn't been a more consistent back in the NFL than J.K. Dobbins. 11-plus fantasy points in 5 straight, touchdowns in 4 of the 5 games, and R.J. Harvey hasn't made a dent in those weekly touches. Now he gets the Jets, who allow the 9th most fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 15, we've got Rico Dowdle. Rico steps in and goes ham in week 5, 234 total yards against Miami in week 5. And now it sounds like he's going to get another start in week 6, which just so happens to be a revenge game against his old team in Dallas, who allows over 22 fantasy points per game to running backs. All right, that's it for tier number 2. Let's look at tier number 3. We've got Travis Etienne Jr., Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Rashad White, Cam Scatteraboo, Kenneth Walker III, Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard, David Montgomery, and Derrick Henry. At 16, we've got Travis Etienne Jr., and he couldn't get anything going against Kansas City, but they've been one of the better run defenses in the NFL in the last month. Etienne is still dominating backfield touches, though, and now he gets a better matchup against Seattle. At number 17, we've got Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, and if this kid has 15 touches plus week, he would be locked into the top 15. He's playing so well, but only has had 48 touches in the last 5 games. He exploded in week 5, so let's hope that that leads to more volume against Chicago, who allows the 4th most fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 18, we've got Rashad White, and Tampa is a plug-and-play backfield. Bucky goes out, White comes in, and he should continue to produce just fine. Sean Tucker isn't a threat to his volume, and we all saw what Kyron Williams did to this 49ers defense last week. At number 19, we've got Cam Scatterbo, and to see where this guy was to start the season compared to where he is now after 5 weeks, it's absolutely crazy. 90-plus total yards or a touchdown in 4 straight. He's playing so hard, they can't take him off the field at this point. Even if Tracy returns, it's simply not his backfield anymore. At number 20, we've got Kenneth Walker III going into Jacksonville, and he's the most hated running back, even though he is returning what his draft value was. Sure, we want less Charbonnet, but Walker is still a top 20 running back on the season, and he's had 9+ fantasy points in 4 straight. And the Jags are a middle-of-the-pack defense against the run as well. At number 21, we've got Ramondre Stevenson, and I mean, who cares about fumbles anyway? It's apparent that they're going to stay committed to Stevenson in New England. Gibson's now hurt, and that opens up more potential touches, and now we get a Saints defense who allows the 12th most fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 22, we've got Tony Pollard, and he's the current running back 24 on the year, and he's now scored 9+ fantasy points in 4 straight games. Tennessee's coming off the comeback win against Arizona, and Pollard still dominated touches despite the return of Spears. It's a great matchup against Vegas this week. We like Tony Pollard at number 22. At number 23, we've got David Montgomery, and this is one of those weeks where it's really a crapshoot when it comes to Monty. The matchup against Kansas City, it's not great. He has a low floor, but the guy still has huge games all the time, so how can you afford to sit him? Given all the injuries, though, he's still a Verge top 24 running back. At number 24, this is so sad, we've got Derrick Henry, and it's because Cooper Rush sucks, and the defense has had its top 4 to 5 defenders hurt. Teams are now selling out to stop the run because Cooper Rush strikes fear into nobody. Now, CMC did torch this Rams defense last week, but Henry's situation is just getting worse by the week. All right, that's it for tier number 3. Let's look at tier 4. We've got Alvin Kamara, Jalen Warren, DeAndre Swift, Chase Brown, Michael Carter, and Hassan Haskins. At number 25, we've got Alvin Kamara, and trade rumors are floating, and at this point, it would be a positive for this guy. His role changes by the week, the scoring chances aren't there weekly, and now he gets the Patriots, who allow the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 26, we've got Jalen Warren coming off a bye week, and if you remember, he was a late scratch in London 2 weeks ago with knee discomfort. It seems like he could be good to go this week, but with a matchup against Cleveland, it's not going to be easy. They allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. At number 27, we've got DeAndre Swift going into Washington, and he's another back coming off of the bye week, and despite nobody being excited to start Swift, he's still averaging 10 fantasy points per game, and Washington hasn't allowed less than 150 yards rushing in a game yet this year. A Chicago lead could lead to a lot of DeAndre Swift. At number 28, we've got Chase Brown, and Joe Flacco is here to save today, everybody. Well, probably not, but it can't get much worse. No touchdowns since week 1. He hasn't had a game all year with at least 75 total yards, and we need Flacco to move the ball down the field to open those run lanes. So our fingers are crossed. Number 29, we've got Michael Carter going into Indianapolis, and 23 touches for 73 yards is not the definition of efficiency, but DeMarcado made a horrible mistake dropping that ball at the goal line and then took a gut punch on the sidelines from Coach Gannon. He should retain good volume, but this matchup is going to be a lot tougher. At number 30, we've got Hassan Haskins, and this backfield is going to be a mess. Both Vidal and Haskins will get touches. The offensive line is full of injuries, but this matchup against Miami, it's just too good to pass up because Miami allows the 5th most fantasy points per game to running backs. All right, that's it for tier 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we got a few guys on the outside looking in with Zach Charbonnet, Kamani Vidal, Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco, Travion Henderson, RJ Harvey, Blake Corum, and Kenneth Gainwell. And that's how the running back rankings line up for week 6. And we got to know, which running back are you leaning on and who are you fading this week? Make sure to drop your start, sit calls in the comments, smash that like button, and make sure that you're subscribed for the rest of this week's rankings. Let's go get a win this week.
Analytics